The crisis in the cosmos. The galaxy was in danger. A peaceful and intelligent alien species known as the Excelnari had lived for centuries in harmony with the universe. They were a species of explorers, scientists, and peaceful beings who valued knowledge and cooperation. The Excelnari had never known war, nor had they ever been part of conflict. Their home planet, known as Xelnar, was a lush world full of beautiful landscapes, advanced technology, and a culture dedicated to understanding the stars. But all of this was about to change. A powerful and ruthless enemy had emerged from the farthest corners of the galaxy. They were called the Drex, a warlike species with no mercy or kindness in their hearts. The Drex had conquered world after world, destroying everything in their path. The Excelnari had heard stories of their brutal ways, but they never thought the Drex would reach them. They were wrong. It all started when the Drex arrived at a nearby star system, completely wiping out the peaceful inhabitants. They didn't just kill the creatures, they destroyed entire planets, leaving nothing behind but ashes and rubble. The Drex had no interest in negotiation or peace talks. They only wanted control and destruction. One by one, the Excelnari's allies began to fall. The other species of the galaxy couldn't stand against the Drex's might. Every attempt to stop them ended in failure. The Excelnari knew their time was running out. They had tried to warn others, but the Drex were too strong. The once proud Excelnari now found themselves hiding behind the walls of their cities, desperately trying to protect what little they had left. The Excelnari's leaders gathered in secret. They knew their own forces couldn't defeat the Drex alone. They needed help, but who could they turn to? Every peaceful civilization they knew was either destroyed or too far away to help in time. As the Drex advanced toward Xelnar, the Excelnari began to lose hope. They had no choice but to call for help from beyond their known universe. With no time to waste, the Excelnari activated an ancient communication device, one they had kept hidden for centuries. This device, known as the SOS beacon, was capable of sending a signal across the galaxy, even to distant and unknown regions. The Excelnari had never used it before. They didn't know what would happen or who would answer, but it was their last chance. The signal was sent, but the Excelnari were not hopeful. They knew that the chances of anyone coming to their rescue were slim. The Drex were already too close, their ships moving in the direction of Xelnar. The Excelnari watched in silence as the enemy fleet grew larger, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that their time was running out. Meanwhile, far beyond the Excelnari's galaxy, on a world that the Excelnari had never heard of, a species of humans lived. These humans, known as Deathworlders, were survivors. Unlike most species in the galaxy, they had lived on planets filled with harsh environments, dangerous creatures, and deadly weather. Their world was a place where survival was a constant struggle. They were known for their strength, resilience, and a willingness to fight no matter the odds. The Deathworlders had never been part of galactic politics, and their reputation was that of a dangerous and unpredictable species. Most other species considered them too violent and unstable to trust. But when the SOS beacon reached the humans, something stirred inside them. They had heard of the Drex, of course. Everyone had. The stories of their ruthlessness had traveled across the galaxy. But the humans were not like the other species. They didn't shrink away from danger. They embraced it. They didn't back down from a fight. They charged headfirst into it. The signal was received by a group of human leaders, military commanders, and advisors. They studied the distress message, their faces grim as they read the desperate plea for help. This was not just any ordinary mission. This was a call for survival. After a brief discussion, the decision was made. The humans would answer the call. They would come to the aid of the Excelnari, whether the Excelnari wanted their help or not. The Deathworlders were not known for their diplomacy or their calmness. They didn't send peaceful ambassadors. They sent warriors, and they didn't do so quietly. The decision was made. The humans were coming to the rescue. Back on Xelnar, The Excelnary still believed they were alone. They had no idea who had received their call, or even if anyone had heard it. But they were about to find out. As the Drix closed in on their home planet, the Excelnary continued to prepare for the worst. They reinforced their cities, evacuated their people to safe zones, and tried to come to terms with the idea that they might not survive this battle. But then, something happened. A new signal, one that was stronger and louder than anything they had ever received before, came through their communication systems. It wasn't from any species they recognized, but it was clear. The humans were coming. The Excelnary watched as strange ships appeared on their radar, moving faster than anything they had ever seen. They didn't know who these new visitors were, but they had a feeling that, just maybe, these Deathworlders might be their last hope. The stage was set. The Dreks were closing in. The Excelnary were waiting. And the Deathworlders were on their way. The galaxy would soon witness a battle like no other, and the fate of one peaceful species would rest in the hands of warriors from a world they could never have imagined. Would the Deathworlders succeed, or would the Dreks finally crush the last hope of the Excelnary? Only time would tell. The mysterious signal. In the vast and ever-expanding cosmos, that Excelnary had long understood that their peaceful existence could not last forever. The galaxy was a place full of unknowns, of dangers they could not predict. But nothing had prepared them for the arrival of the Dreks, and nothing had prepared them for the moment when they would have to call for help from the farthest reaches of the universe. After sending the SOS beacon, the Excelnary waited in silence, unsure of whether anyone would hear their desperate cry. The signal was weak, an almost hopeless whisper into the infinite void of space. As they looked up at their sky, watching the dark clouds of Dreks ships approaching, fear and uncertainty gripped their hearts. They had sent out the call, but deep down, they feared it was too late. The Dreks were closing in, their ships like ominous shadows in the distance, and the Excelnary knew they would soon be overrun. Back on Earth, millions of light years away, life was vastly different. The humans who lived there had no idea that the Excelnary even existed. Earth, a planet filled with its own struggles and dangers, was home to a species that had faced challenges no other beings could comprehend. The humans, often called Deathworlders, were survivors, hardened by an unforgiving planet that tested their limits in every way imaginable. Unlike the peaceful civilizations of the galaxy, humans had grown up fighting against everything. From wild beasts to deadly weather, from diseases to wars, humanity had experienced it all. The call for help from the Excelnary, however, was unlike anything the humans had ever heard before. The signal reached Earth, transmitted across the stars in the form of a distress message so desperate it could not be ignored. But how could the humans know that the signal wasn't a trap? How could they trust beings they had never met? Despite these questions, the humans recognized the urgency in the message. They recognized a cry for help that could not be ignored. After all, the Deathworlders had long believed that in the face of destruction, they could only rely on themselves. The signal came to the attention of the United Earth government's most elite military leaders, the ones who controlled Earth's vast and advanced technology. They didn't waste time in making a decision. The humans, known for their ability to fight even in the most hopeless of situations, knew that this was their moment. If the Excelnary were to fall, it would send a message to the rest of the galaxy that the Dreks could not be stopped, and no one would be safe. The Dreks were a force of nature, unstoppable and brutal, but the Deathworlders didn't fear them. They had faced death countless times and emerged victorious. The order was given. The humans would respond to the distress call, but the Excelnary had no idea what they were in for. Back on Excelnary, as the Excelnary gathered around their communication systems, they anxiously waited for any sign that their message had been received. They had never needed help more than they did now. Their great leaders stood together, uncertain and anxious, as they watched the stars above. The Excelnary had no allies left. Their trust in others had been shattered by the Dreks, and they were all too aware that they couldn't survive this alone. For hours, nothing changed. The Xelnari could only watch the sky, waiting for the inevitable. The Drex were too powerful, too close, and the Xelnari knew their fate was sealed. But then suddenly, the faintest signal came through. It wasn't much, barely a blip on their systems, but it was there. A new signal, unfamiliar and alien, crackled through their communication channels. At first, the Xelnari could not believe it. They had received countless transmissions from different species before, but nothing like this. This signal was different. It wasn't a standard communication. It was something strange, something new. The message was simple but clear. "We are coming," it said. The Xelnari had no idea who was sending the message, but they were willing to believe. The word sparked a flicker of hope in their hearts. Could it be? Could help really be on the way? The signal didn't come from an ally they recognized, nor did it come from a species they had ever encountered. But they didn't care. They needed help. They needed someone who was brave enough to fight, someone strong enough to stand against the Drex. The human fleet, unbeknownst to the Xelnari, had already begun its journey. The humans had mobilized with shocking speed. The Deathworlders were not a race that wasted time. They didn't need preparation or long speeches. Their response to danger was immediate, direct, and overwhelming. The fleet, led by the United Earth Government's military commanders, traveled through space with a force that would be difficult to understand by anyone who had not lived through the brutal trials of Earth. These humans were survivors, warriors forged in the harshest conditions imaginable. They didn't fear the unknown. They didn't fear the Drex. As the human ships moved through the galaxy, cutting through the emptiness of space, they were a symbol of something entirely foreign to the Xelnari: hope, strength, and unrelenting determination. But they were also something the Drex had never encountered before, a force that would not back down, no matter the odds. Back on Xelnar, the Xelnari watched the skies once more. This time, something was different. In the distance, they saw ships appearing, streaking through space with lights brighter than any they had ever seen. These ships were unlike anything the Xelnari had imagined. They were sleek, fast, and powerful, seemingly built for war. The Xelnari didn't know who these visitors were, but they knew one thing for certain. The Deathworlders were here, and their arrival was a sign that the fight was not over. The battle for Xelnar had only just begun. The Drex had no idea what was about to hit them. And the Xelnari were about to learn just what kind of warriors the Deathworlders truly were. The arrival of the Deathworlders. The atmosphere on Xelnar had been tense for days, with the endless black void of space pressing down on the minds of the Xelnari. They had prepared for the worst, bracing for an attack from the Drex that could wipe them off the face of their planet. But in that fragile moment between life and death, something unexpected happened. The Xelnari were about to witness something they had never thought possible: the arrival of the Deathworlders. It all began with a low hum, a strange vibration that ran through the air, barely noticeable at first. But as the sound grew louder, the Xelnari couldn't ignore it. It wasn't just a vibration. It was the sound of something large approaching, something that commanded attention. In the skies above Xelnar, the first sign of the Deathworlders appeared, and it wasn't subtle. Brilliant streaks of light sliced through the darkness, cutting across the horizon in a dazzling display of speed and power. At first, the Xelnari thought it might be the Drex, launching an attack from above. But the ships were moving too fast, too gracefully. They were not like the Drex warships, which were massive, slow, and menacing. These ships were sleek, designed for efficiency and precision. They appeared out of nowhere, like lightning flashing across the dark expanse of space, their outlines sharp and angular. They had the appearance of warriors in the night sky, ready to strike without warning. The Xelnari stood frozen, unsure of what to make of this new development. They didn't know whether to rejoice or remain cautious. These ships were certainly not the Drex, But who were they? Could this be the help they had called for? Could these mysterious ships truly be the Deathworlders, the humans they had barely heard of, let alone seen? In the control rooms of Excelnar, the communication officers scrambled to identify the ships. They were unlike anything they had ever encountered, and their technology was beyond what the Excelnar had ever imagined. No one had ever built a ship capable of such speed and agility, not even the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The humans, it seemed, were not just powerful. They were extraordinary. The ships came closer, their engines emitting a low, powerful hum. The Excelnar could feel the ground tremble beneath their feet as the ships descended. The sky above Excelnar grew brighter, filled with flashes of light as the fleet of human vessels made their final approach. From the ground, it looked as though the heavens themselves were opening up, as if the very stars were coming to life. In moments, the Deathworlders' fleet hovered above the Excelnar cities, blocking out the sun and casting long, menacing shadows over the landscape. It was clear now that the Excelnar had received the help they had so desperately prayed for. But they had no idea what to expect from these strange new allies. On the surface, the Excelnar watched in awe as the ships landed with incredible precision. Unlike the Drex, who had no regard for the destruction they caused, the humans landed in perfect formation, each ship touching down in a designated area, causing no harm to the environment. The Excelnar were accustomed to technology that aimed to preserve and protect the environment, but the humans were different. They didn't land with grace or elegance. They landed with purpose. As the dust settled, the Excelnar saw figures emerging from the ships. They were unlike any species they had ever seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered beings with strong, muscular builds and expressions of quiet determination. They wore armor that gleamed under the sun, each piece designed for protection and battle. Their eyes burned with intensity and focus, as if they had faced and conquered every challenge the universe could throw at them. The humans, the Deathworlders, stepped out of their ships with a confidence that was both unsettling and awe-inspiring. There was no fear in their eyes, no hesitation in their movements. They were here for one reason, and one reason only: to fight. The Excelnar, still unsure of who these beings were or whether they could trust them, remained at a distance. They watched as the humans began to set up camp, organizing themselves with military precision. There was no celebration, no sign of relief. The humans moved quickly, checking their weapons, preparing for the battle that was to come. The Deathworlders didn't waste time. They were here to fight, and they would not rest until the Drex were defeated. A group of Excelnar leaders, their faces still filled with uncertainty, approached the human commanders. The tension was palpable as they stood face to face for the first time. The Excelnar were a peaceful people, used to diplomatic negotiations and friendly discussions. But the humans were different. They didn't greet their allies with warm smiles or formal handshakes. They simply nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. The leader of the humans, a tall man with a scar across his face and a gaze that seemed to pierce through everything, stepped forward. "We've come to help," he said in simple, direct words that carried weight. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable firmness in it. "The Drex won't win this time." The Excelnar leader, still uncertain, looked at the man for a long moment before speaking. We don't know what to expect. You are not like any species we have ever encountered." The human leader gave a slight smile, though it was one that didn't carry warmth. "We are not like the others, and that's why we'll win." And with that, the alliance was formed. The humans had come to save the Excelnar, but they didn't come with promises or words of peace. They came with weapons, with determination, and with an unshakable belief that no enemy could stand in their way. The Excelnar were grateful, but they were also scared. These humans were not gentle diplomats or peaceful explorers. They were warriors, and they were here for one reason: to win. The arrival of the Deathworlders marked the beginning of a new chapter in the battle for Excelnar. The Drex, once thought to be unstoppable, were about to meet an enemy they had never imagined, a force of nature that would stop at nothing to protect those in need. And for the Excellenary, their future was no longer uncertain. They had allies now, and those allies were not afraid to fight. First battle. The moment the Deathworlders arrived on Excelnar, a heavy, unspoken understanding settled between the Excellenary and their new human allies. The planet had never known the horrors of war, yet it stood on the precipice of a catastrophe, with the Drex closing in. The time for planning and strategy was over. The battle was about to begin. The Excellenary had been preparing for the Drex's attack for weeks, fortifying their cities and creating barriers to slow down their enemies. But they knew it would not be enough. The Drex were a ruthless, unstoppable force. And though the Excellenary were skilled in technology and peaceful sciences, they had no true experience in war. They needed more than walls. They needed warriors. And the Deathworlders had come just in time. The first sign of the Drex fleet was a ripple in the sky. Dark shapes emerging from the void, growing larger by the minute. The Excellenary had seen these ships before, watching them tear apart planets and civilizations. They were massive, hulking warships covered in thick armor, their engines glowing with the promise of destruction. There was no grace in their movements. They were built for one thing: to annihilate. On the ground, the Excellenary watched in horror as the Drex ships descended, casting long, twisted shadows over their cities. The fear was palpable, as the Excellenary knew they couldn't hold out much longer. But as they looked to the horizon, they saw the humans readying themselves for the fight. They weren't afraid. In fact, they were eager for it. The human fleet had set up base camp outside the Excellenary capital city, their technology already being used to create defensive positions and prepare for battle. But the Excellenary were still unsure. The humans had come to fight, but would they fight alongside the Excellenary, or would they fight their own war? The Deathworlders had no interest in diplomacy. They were soldiers through and through, and the Excellenary had to decide whether they could trust them in the heat of battle. The first blast echoed through the sky as the Drex fired the first shot. The sound was deafening, like thunder cracking the heavens. The Excellenary felt their hearts skip a beat as the Drexes made their move, sending a series of explosive rounds toward the Excellenary cities. Buildings crumbled, and the ground trembled as the Drexes' weapons tore through the air. But the humans were ready. In an instant, the air around the battlefield was filled with the roar of human battle cries. The Deathworlders were unlike anything the Excellenary had imagined. They did not hesitate or wait for orders. The moment the Drex fired, the humans surged forward, charging toward the enemy with fierce determination. The first human soldiers, clad in their heavy armor, moved like shadows, quick, efficient, and relentless. They were on the move, their weapons raised high, and the energy in their bodies was infectious. The Excellenary, who had never seen such a display of courage and strength, stared in awe as the humans raced to engage the Drex forces. The Excellenary, though nervous, quickly followed suit. They had never fought before, but seeing the humans charge into the fray without fear gave them the courage they needed. They may have been peaceful, but they were not weak. And now, they had allies who were willing to fight alongside them. The battle began in full force, and chaos erupted as the Drex opened fire. Explosions filled the air, and the sound of metal smashing against metal rang out across the battlefield. But amid the noise and destruction, the humans fought with a precision and skill that was terrifying to behold. Their weapons were unlike anything that Excellenary had ever seen, advanced energy-based guns that fired with pinpoint accuracy. The Drex, though powerful, were unprepared for the humans' ferocity. Human soldiers dashed from cover to cover, their movements fast and calculated. They did not waste a second. Each soldier seemed to know exactly where to strike, where to fire, and where to advance. They communicated silently, with hand signals and quick gestures, working together as if they had fought alongside each other for years. And their weapons, laser guns, grenade launchers, and energy shields, ripped through Drek's forces like a hot knife through butter. For the Excelenary, it was as if a new world had opened up. They had always valued intellect and peaceful solutions, but now they were witnessing something far different. The humans fought not just with their technology, but with something much more primal. Their sheer will to survive, their unshakable belief that they could overcome any enemy. One human soldier, a young woman with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes, charged forward with a massive energy rifle in her hands. She fired shot after shot, her aim flawless as Drek's warriors fell one after another. The Excelenary leader, still unsure how to view their new allies, approached him. "Are you not afraid? They are more powerful than we ever imagined." The commander turned his gaze toward the Excelenary leader, his expression calm, but firm. "Fear is a luxury we don't have. If we let fear control us, we'll lose. We fight because we have no other choice. If we don't stand against them, there won't be anything left to protect. And we fight for more than just survival. We fight for hope." It was these words, simple yet profound, that struck the Excelenary deeply. They had always believed in diplomacy, in peaceful solutions, but the humans had shown them that sometimes survival required more than just words. It required strength, it required will, and it required sacrifice. As the days passed, the Excelenary slowly began to understand the true power of the Deathworlders. It wasn't just their weapons or their technology, it was their mindset. The humans had faced the worst the universe could throw at them, and had survived. They didn't just rely on their technology. They relied on their instincts, their resilience, and their unwavering belief in the possibility of victory. The Excelenary had always been a species of intellect, analyzing problems and solving them with science and diplomacy. But in the face of the Dreks, they realized that intellect alone would not be enough. They needed the raw determination and the willpower that the humans brought to the table. One night, as the Deathworlders continued their preparations, a small group of Excelenary gathered at the human camp. They had come to observe the humans' tactics, to learn how they could fight alongside them more effectively. The humans, despite their hardened exterior, welcomed the Excelenari's presence, sharing their knowledge and strategies without hesitation. They didn't treat the Excelenary as weak allies in need of protection. They treated them as equals, as fellow fighters in the war for survival. A human sergeant, young but with the hardened gaze of someone who had seen far too much combat, stood before the group of Excelenary. "You don't need to be soldiers to fight," he said, his voice steady and sure. "But you do need to fight. The Dreks won't care whether you're peaceful or not. They'll come, and they'll destroy everything in their path. If you want to survive, you'll need to stand your ground." The Excelenary, though hesitant, were eager to learn. They were no strangers to technology, and they quickly adapted to the human ways of preparing for battle. They studied the humans' weaponry, advanced firearms that could fire with deadly accuracy, grenades that could disable entire squads of enemies, and armor that could withstand even the most brutal attacks. But what stood out to the Excelenary most was the humans' unspoken code: never give up, never back down. The humans were not the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. They didn't have the superweapons that the Dreks had, nor did they possess the vast fleets that many of the galaxy's major powers had at their disposal. But they had something more important: a spirit that refused to be broken, a will that would never bend in the face of adversity. As the days turned into weeks, the Excelenary began to train alongside the humans. They didn't become warriors overnight, but they learned to fight with the same intensity, the same hunger for survival. They learned that battle was not just about fighting an enemy. It was about facing your own fears and doubts and pushing past them, no matter how impossible it seemed. They learned that victory didn't always come from the most powerful weapon, but from the most relentless will to win. And then, the Dreks returned. This time, they came in greater numbers, their warships filling the sky like a swarm of locusts descending on a field. The Excelenary looked up, seeing the shadow of death once more, and for a moment, Fear crept into their hearts, but when they turned to the Deathworlders, they saw nothing but confidence. The humans didn't flinch. They didn't hesitate. They simply stood tall, ready for what was to come. The battle was intense, fiercer than anything the Excelenary had experienced. The Drex unleashed their full might, firing their devastating weapons at everything in sight. Buildings were torn apart, and the ground shook with the force of the battle. But the humans fought back with all their might, using everything they had learned, everything they had taught the Excelenary. As the battle raged on, the humans' tactics shone through. They used the terrain to their advantage, striking from unexpected angles, setting traps, and using their advanced weapons to turn the tide of battle. The Excelenary, now hardened by the humans' teachings, fought alongside them with newfound strength. They were no longer just survivors. They were warriors, fighting for their future, fighting for the galaxy. In the end, it was the combined strength of the Excelenary and the humans that turned the Drex back. The Drex, who had once been an unstoppable force, now found themselves on the defensive. The battle ended with the Drex retreating once again, their forces shattered and broken. The victory was hard-won, but it was clear. The power of the Deathworlders was unmatched, and with their help, the Excelenary had found a strength they never knew they had. Together, they had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the will to survive could overcome anything. The Excelenary had learned the true meaning of power, not just in weapons or technology, but in the unyielding spirit to fight. And with the humans by their side, they knew that no force in the galaxy could ever crush them again. Turning the tide. The battle for Excelenor was far from over, but the tide had begun to turn. The once feared Drex, the ruthless invaders who had plowed through the galaxy without mercy, were now struggling to maintain their hold on the planet. The humans, the Deathworlders, had proven to be more than just powerful allies. They had turned the Excelenari's desperate fight into a new kind of warfare, one built on relentless strategy, unyielding spirit, and the kind of courage that turned the most hopeless situations into victories. In the wake of the first few battles, the Excelenary began to understand something that had eluded them for so long: the true nature of the human spirit. The Excelenary, once pacifists and thinkers, had never been warriors, and their world had always been one of peace. But in the chaos of war, they were discovering a new strength. They weren't just surviving. They were fighting back. The Drex had underestimated the humans. They thought they could crush the Excelenary easily, as they had done to countless other species. But the humans were different. They fought not just with weapons and technology, but with an unwavering will to win. Every attack, every ambush, every battle had been an opportunity for the humans to push back the Drex, forcing them to retreat time and again. The Drex ships that had once been so intimidating now found themselves under attack from all sides. The humans had turned the battlefield into a deadly game of cat and mouse, forcing the Drex into positions where they could be picked off one by one. Human snipers, perched in high towers or hidden in the wilderness, picked off Drex soldiers with deadly precision. Human soldiers moved in small, disciplined groups, coordinating attacks and cutting down Drex forces with terrifying efficiency. The battle no longer seemed so hopeless. The Drex, who had once dominated the battlefield with sheer numbers and power, were now being outflanked and outsmarted at every turn. But it wasn't just the humans who were fighting back. The Excelenary, having seen the human strength and resolve, began to change. They weren't passive observers anymore. They had become active participants in the war. The Excelenary had technology and intelligence on their side, and they began using their advanced systems to disrupt the Drex's communications, making it difficult for the enemy to coordinate their attacks. Excelenary scientists worked alongside the humans to develop new weapons, energy shields that could withstand Drex blasts, bombs that would disable Drex machinery, and stealth technologies that made it almost impossible for the Drex to track them. It was the combined might of the two species that began to break the Drex's hold. While the Drex focused on brute force and overwhelming numbers, the humans and Selneri worked in tandem, using tactics and strategies that slowly began to dismantle their defenses. The humans, true to their nature, had no hesitation. As the Drexes regrouped for another major attack, the human commander, his face scarred from years of battle, stood before his troops, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "We've got them on the ropes. This is our moment. We hit them hard, and we hit them fast. No mercy." The Deathworlders moved into position, their battle formations flawless. The Excellenary, now trained by the humans, stood alongside them, ready to take the fight to the enemy. The Drex, unaware of the shift in tactics, sent their forces charging in, thinking they could overpower the defenders with sheer strength. But the humans were ready. As the Drex forces stormed the battlefield, they were met with a barrage of fire. Human soldiers moved swiftly, using the terrain to their advantage, laying traps and luring the Drex into deadly ambushes. It wasn't just firepower that held the line. It was the intelligence of the humans. They knew how to read the battlefield, how to use the environment, and how to outsmart their enemies. Their attack was calculated, cold, and efficient. The Excellenary, following the humans' lead, began to deploy their own defenses. The humans had taught them not just how to fight, but how to think like a warrior. Zelneri weapons, once thought to be designed solely for exploration and research, were now used in ways that even their own scientists hadn't imagined. Laser-guided missiles launched with precision, targeting Drex warships in the sky. Energy cannons were set up in hidden positions, blasting through the shields of Drex armor. The Drex, once so confident in their dominance, now found themselves cornered. Their warships, powerful as they were no match for the combined might of the humans and the Telneri. The Drex forces scattered, their command structure thrown into disarray as the humans and Selneri launched coordinated strikes on their supply lines and communication systems. It was clear now that the Drex had lost their edge. But despite the pressure, the Drex were not quick to surrender. They were a prideful, aggressive species, and they would fight to the bitter end. The human commander knew this. He had seen it before on countless battlefields across the galaxy. He wasn't under any illusions. The victory wouldn't come easy. The Drex would not be defeated by strategy alone. They would need to be broken. "Get ready," the commander said, his voice low. "This is the final push. We take their leader, and we end this war." The Deathworlders and the Selneri began their final assault. They targeted the Drex's flagship, the heart of their military operation. The battle was intense, the air filled with explosions and gunfire as the two sides clashed in a brutal melee. The Drex, desperate and enraged, fought with everything they had, but the humans and Selneri were relentless. It wasn't just about tactics now, it was about survival. The Drex had underestimated their enemies. They had thought that the Excellenari's peaceful nature and the humans' unpredictable violence would be no match for their raw power. But they had not anticipated the unyielding will of the Deathworlders, nor the strategic brilliance of the Excellenary. The humans, in their final push, boarded the Drex flagship. The battle inside was chaotic, but the human soldiers fought with a savage intensity that made the Drex shudder. Every hallway, every room, every corridor was cleared with ruthless efficiency. The human commander led the charge, cutting down Drex soldiers with swift, decisive strikes. His eyes never wavered from his goal, to end the war once and for all. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the human commander confronted the Drex warlord, the leader of their forces. It was a brutal, no-holds-barred fight. The warlord was massive, covered in armor that seemed impenetrable, but the commander, relying on every battle tactic and trick he had learned over the years, found his opening. With one final, decisive strike, he brought the Drex warlord to the ground. The warlord's death sent a shockwave through the Drex forces. Without their leader, their organization crumbled. The remaining Drex troops, disoriented and leaderless, began to retreat in chaos. The final blow had been struck. As the dust settled on the battlefield, the Selenari and humans stood victorious. The Drext had been defeated, their forces scattered and broken. The Selenari, who had once believed in nothing but peace, now stood as warriors, battle-tested and ready for whatever the galaxy might throw at them next. And the Deathworlders. They had done what they always did. They had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. Together, they had turned the tide of the war. Victory and a new alliance. The Drekks were broken. The once feared warlords of the galaxy, who had marched through space with an iron fist, had been driven back, their forces scattered across the stars. The great battle for Excellenor had come to a victorious end, but it was not just the triumph of war that marked this moment. It was the dawn of a new chapter in the history of the galaxy, one that had been forged in blood, steel, and unyielding resolve. As the human and Selenari forces stood side by side, surveying the aftermath of their hard-fought victory, a deep silence fell over the battlefield. The destruction was widespread. Burned remnants of Drek's warships lay scattered across the ground, and the smoke of conflict hung heavy in the air. But the Drekks no longer had the strength to continue their conquest. They had been driven away, their war machine reduced to rubble. The Selenari, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and awe, looked at the humans who had come to their aid. These Deathworlders, who had once seemed like strangers to them, were now their brothers in arms. They had stood shoulder to shoulder with the Selenari in the heat of battle, and together they had achieved the impossible. The Drekst were gone, and Selenor was free once more. For the humans, the victory was bittersweet. They had faced death at every turn, and many had fallen. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of the brave men and women who had given everything to see this fight through. Yet, even in the face of such loss, there was a quiet sense of pride. They had won, not just for themselves, but for the Selenari and for the future of the galaxy. The Deathworlders had come to Excelnar as warriors, but they were leaving with something more. A sense of camaraderie, a new alliance that had been forged through the heat of battle. The Selenari, who had once feared the humans for their unpredictability and violence, had come to see their true strength. It wasn't just in their weapons or their tactics, it was in their spirit. The humans had proven that survival, true survival, came not from strength alone, but from the will to keep fighting, no matter how dark the odds. They had shown the Selenari that sometimes peace could not be preserved without sacrifice, and that in the most desperate moments, it was the warriors who stood tall and held the line. The human commander, whose eyes were shadowed by the weight of countless battles, stood before the Selenari leaders, his posture unwavering. His soldiers, weary but resolute, lined up behind him, waiting for the final orders. The commander turned to face the Selenari, his voice steady, but filled with the quiet intensity that had carried them through the war. "We've done it," he said, his words carrying a sense of finality. "But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." The Selenari leaders nodded, understanding the weight of his words. They had seen what the Deathworlders were capable of, and they knew that this victory was more than just a military success. It was the start of something much larger, a new alliance, a new future for the galaxy. The Selenari leader, who had once been hesitant to trust the humans, stepped forward. His face was solemn, but there was a spark of gratitude in his eyes. "We could not have won without you. We did not understand the strength you carry, but we have seen it now. You are not just warriors. You are protectors. And for that, we are eternally grateful." The human commander gave a small, grim smile. "We don't fight for thanks. We fight because we have to. But it's good to know that we've earned your trust." A deep silence fell over the battlefield as the two leaders exchanged a look of mutual respect. The bond between them, once forged in the fires of battle, had now solidified into something more. The humans and Selenari were no longer two separate species. They were allies, bound together by a shared purpose, a shared strength, and a shared victory. As the wounded were tended to and the bodies of the fallen were honored, the human fleet began preparations to leave Selenar. But this time, their departure wasn't a goodbye. It was the beginning of something much greater. The Deathworlders were not leaving their new allies behind. They were leaving with a promise. The alliance would continue, and together, the humans and Selneri would be a force that no enemy could defeat. Before the humans departed, the Selneri organized a ceremony in honor of the fallen soldiers, both human and Selneri, who had given their lives to protect the planet and its future. The sky above Selenar was filled with lights as both species released glowing orbs into the atmosphere, each one representing a life lost, a life sacrificed for the greater good. It was a solemn moment, a moment of remembrance, but also a moment of renewal. For those who had fought, there was no greater honor than to know that their sacrifice had saved their people and their planet. The human commander, standing with the Selneri leader, watched as the orbs drifted into the sky, their lights joining the stars above. For a brief moment, the battle-worn soldiers were silent, allowing the weight of the moment to sink in. The commander felt something stir inside him, a deep sense of fulfillment, but also a recognition that this was not the end. There would be more battles, more enemies to face, and more challenges to overcome. But for now, there was peace. "You'll be safe now," the commander said quietly to the Selneri leader. "We'll make sure of it." The Selneri leader, his expression calm yet full of gratitude, nodded. "And we will make sure that the galaxy knows the strength of our alliance. This is just the beginning." As the human fleet ascended into the sky, leaving behind the world they had fought so hard to protect, the Selneri watched in awe. The battle for Selenar had ended, but a new era had begun, an era of unity, strength, and resilience. The galaxy, once filled with division and endless wars, was on the cusp of something greater. Together, the humans and the Selneri would shape the future of the cosmos. Together, they would ensure that no enemy would ever threaten their world again. And with that, the Selneri and the Deathworlders parted ways, for now. But in the hearts of both species, the promise of a lasting alliance, forged in the fires of war, remained. The galaxy would never be the same again.